1789. It happened in Russia, in Italy. It happened in very many places.
But the whole idea, if you see the group of the people who are sit together, they are somehow completely divided, but they are unified on coming out of this situation, or they are unified exactly to be against what was going on status quo. But in general, they are completely divided. They are different groups. The good news about today, which I have to mention it, which is like probably we are waiting for it, was the release of Wael Ghunem. Wael Ghunem is one of the people who are behind this January 25th revolution, or we'd say uprising, what happened, because he was the one who was mainly behind Colonel Khalid Said Facebook group that it was calling for, or let the people gather together in order to protest against status quo or against Mubarak regime and whatever they are changing.
Thomas Gergesian will have the chance to speak a little bit more extensively about this a little bit later, but for now, thanks very much.
Thank you.
The founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, has returned to court in the United Kingdom. A judge is expected to rule on whether he should be extradited to Sweden to answer allegations of rape. His defense lawyers argue that the Swedish prosecutor doesn't have the right to issue a European arrest warrant. They're also concerned the trial will be held in secret, with no chance of open justice. They also claim an abuse of proceedings because Assange has repeatedly offered himself for questioning, but he was turned down, they say. They also argue that Assange is a victim of illegal and corrupt behavior by the Swedish prosecutors, and that any extradition could lead to his deportation to the United States, where he could face the death penalty. Lawrence Lee is at the court in London. A whole list of grievances and positions from the defense. How strong a case do they have?
Well, certainly the defence team have been trying as hard as they can to undermine the case for extradition. There are several planks to what they're saying. As you said, they're suggesting if he does go to Sweden, he wouldn't get a fair trial. They've tried very hard to undermine the specific allegations being made against him by these two women who claim to have been raped, saying that in fact the sex was entirely consensual and therefore it's not a matter for extradition, because in Britain it wouldn't even be a crime. And they've also tried to undermine the reputation of the Swedish prosecutor who has issued the European arrest warrants by saying that she doesn't actually have the power to do it. They introduced their first two witnesses this afternoon, and in a way their introduction actually served to show quite how difficult this whole process is. There was two legal experts from Sweden. The first, a retired female judge who described the prosecutor in Sweden as having biased views against men and the prosecution as being malicious. And the second, a man who claimed that one of the rape victims had in fact had sex with Julian Assange and the next day had gone out for dinner with him and become his press officer, thereby trying to undermine her. But the trouble is that neither of them were able exactly to explain the intricacies of Swedish law to a British court. And here you have a British court trying to make really quite complicated decisions and very significant decisions about the future of all this, but from a great distance and not really understanding what Swedish law is all about. And so it does make you think the whole process is incredibly difficult and complicated for these people.
Lawrence, when we look at the arguments the defense team has made up until now to argue against the deportation of and the extradition of Julian Assange, how much of a factor do you think the possibility of Assange facing the death penalty in the US, how much of a factor will it be in the determination that the judge will finally make?
Well, clearly, I mean, they don't know what the US is planning, but they're trying to play it into their argument. They're saying that one of the things, for example, they're worried about is if he did go to Sweden, he wouldn't get bail and would be held in prison probably for several months awaiting trial. And they use that to raise the suggestion perhaps this could be part of a softening up process to get him ready for deportation to the United States. The other thing they're really worried about, and the prosecution hasn't tried to explain this properly yet, is why it is that the prosecution in Sweden were prepared to interview the two alleged victims, the women, by telephone, but they weren't prepared to interview Julian Assange by telephone. He apparently offered to go into the Swedish embassy in London to do a video conference with the prosecutor, but they said, no, you've got to come to Sweden, and we won't allow this kind of interviewing technique over a distance to be done. And that only lends more weight to those supporters of Assange here who think that really there's something much more devious behind the scenes, and the real reason why they want to get into Sweden is with a view to try to get into the United States. But we don't know, obviously, for certain, and the case, which is now finished for the day, will carry on tomorrow, and maybe by the end of tomorrow the judge will make some sort of decision as to whether indeed he will be deported or not.
Thanks very much for that, Lawrence. Lawrence Lee joining us there. An official review, meanwhile, in the United Kingdom has shown that Britain's previous government did all it could to help Libya win the release of the man convicted of the Lockerbie bombing in 1998. Prime Minister David Cameron has called the release of Abdel Basit al-Megrahi a mistake. Paul Brennan has the details.
The release of the Lockerbie bomber Abdel Basit Ali Mohammed al-Megrahi in 2009 caused considerable anger in America and the UK. And the news that behind the scenes the then UK government was doing all it could to secure his freedom will further stir up emotions. Megrahi remains the only person to have been convicted of involvement in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in 1988, an outrage which killed a total of 270 people. Megrahi's freedom was granted by the devolved authorities in Scotland on compassionate grounds, on the basis that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Publicly, the government of Prime Minister Gordon Brown in London kept its distance, insisting that any criticism of the release should be directed at the Scottish. But the new review reveals that privately, the policy of the London government had fundamentally changed.
They were doing that for geopolitical, for economic reasons. And yet, a year later, when the Scottish government, under due process of Scots law, did release Mr Megrahi, then we were roundly attacked by the Labour Party in Scotland, viciously attacked, and Gordon Brown was absolutely silent. I haven't seen a more case of more organised hypocrisy in my political lifetime.
On October the 8th, 2008, the UK government minister Bill Rammell met his Libyan counterpart, Abdulati Al-Obidi. On October the 17th, Mr Rammell followed it up with a letter, and the two men met again on November 17th. On December the 1st, the British ambassador gave further procedural advice to the Libyans. And at a third meeting in February of 2009, Mr Rammell assured the Libyans that the UK did not want Megrahi to die in a British jail. Just 3 months later, the Libyans requested Megrahi's release. On a visit to Washington last July, the British Prime Minister David Cameron admitted that he would have preferred Megrahi to stay in prison. And when Mr Cameron met with the US Secretary of State at a conference in Munich just last weekend, the pair issued a joint statement strongly agreeing that the release of the Lockerbie bomber had been a mistake. But crucially, although the previous UK administration had changed its stance on Libya, the review concludes there was no improper lobbying of the Scottish authorities by London, nor did the oil company BP influence the Megrahi case. It is a small consolation from a very murky affair. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, London.
And still to come here on Al Jazeera, caught in the crossfire, the residents forced to flee following days of fighting on the Thai-Cambodian border. And bushfires rage across Western Australia, destroying homes in their path.
Over the Sea of Japan, as cool conditions persist, you'll find something to whet your appetite.
Hello once again. Would you believe we have yet another potent winter storm making its way across the United States? Here's an area of cloud and indeed snow. That's the weekend snowfall. That's making its way up towards New England, eastern parts of Canada. Here comes our next system piling out of the Rockies. We'll see temperatures in Denver struggling to reach a high of -12 Celsius. Bitterly cold air coming in once again here. Meanwhile, the temperatures have recovered into Dallas, getting up to 11 degrees, getting up into double figures there. But that's quite a temperature contrast, as is the case for Chicago at -14 Celsius, and a top temperature in DC of only 3 degrees. Similar values there too for New York. The eastern seaboard should be largely fine and dry, at least through the course of Tuesday. That wintry weather will make its way in. Come further south into the Caribbean, we've got some rather heavy rain once again through central areas of the Caribbean into Jamaica. Lesser Antilles stay fine and dry. I suspect we should see it staying dry too for a good part of Puerto Rico and also Haiti. Dry too into central and southern parts of Europe. It's fine dry. It's reasonably warm as well down into the south, 16 or 17 degrees. It does remain wet and windy across western parts, though. More cloud and rain coming into the UK over the next day or so, chiefly affecting those northern parts.
Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
From local traders to international finance, it's commerce that makes the world go round. For global companies and developing markets, communication is the currency, and information is the most valuable commodity. Counting the cost at this time on Al Jazeera.
Be thrilled by the speed. Be delighted by the tastes. Be inspired by the sights. And enjoy the hospitality. The Muscat Festival. It's here, January 27th to February 24th.